New York City's proposed pied-à-terre tax isn't just targeting empty mansions. It's a silent tremor under the entire luxury market, potentially adding hundreds of thousands to annual carrying costs, and it could be coming to a high-cost city near you. Imagine paying an extra 0.5% to 4% of your property's assessed value every single year just for owning a second home you don't occupy full-time. That's what's on the table in NYC, a move backed by analysts like Nick Gurley, who sees it as a direct response to housing unaffordability. This isn't just about collecting revenue. It's about fundamentally reshaping the demand for ultra-luxury, non-primary residences. The big question is, will this tax actually free up housing, or will it just push high-net-worth individuals to different markets, impacting everything from property values to local tax bases? And more importantly, how does a tax like this, which targets property owners but feels like a wealth tax, interact with the current market, where inventory is already tight and interest rates are volatile? Stick with me, because the last part of this is the piece almost everyone gets wrong, and it's the part that decides whether this policy actually helps or dramatically backfires. All right, let's dive into something genuinely groundbreaking. The New York City Pied-à-terre tax, slated for 2026, isn't just another luxury surcharge. It's a seismic shift, and the numbers are already reflecting investor anxiety. We're seeing a 12% increase in luxury condo listings hitting the market in Q4 2024 compared to the same period last year, according to StreetEasy data, as owners try to preempt the new levy. This isn't about just an extra grand or two. We're talking about a potential multi-million-dollar annual burden for some trophy properties, designed to capture what the city views as underutilized wealth. This tax, targeting non-primary residences valued over $5 million, effectively adds an additional property tax, scaling up to 4% of assessed value for the most expensive units. Think about that. On a $25 million apartment, that's an extra $1 million a year on top of existing taxes. For years, analysts like Logan Matashami have pointed to the vulnerability of ultra-luxury markets to legislative changes, and NYC is now testing that theory at scale. What's critical is not just the immediate financial impact, but the chilling effect it's having on new development and long-term investment strategies. This isn't just an NYC issue. It's a blueprint other high-tax, high-cost cities like San Francisco and Miami are watching very closely. But what exactly is a pied-à-terre tax, and why is this particular proposal causing such a ripple effect that even high-end units on Billionaires Row are feeling the pressure? At its core, a pied-à-terre is a secondary residence, often a high-value apartment, used sporadically by owners who typically reside elsewhere. Think international investors, or wealthy individuals with primary homes in Greenwich or Boca Raton. The tax, as proposed in New York City, is an annual levy specifically targeting these non-primary residences, particularly those valued at over $5 million. The underlying motivation is multifaceted. It's framed as a way to address the city's housing affordability crisis, generate revenue for public services, and frankly, to target what some perceive as undertaxed luxury assets. Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigel, a longtime advocate, framed it as ensuring the wealthiest New Yorkers pay their fair share. This isn't a sudden idea either. Discussions have simmered for years, often tied to the ghost apartment debate, the idea that a significant number of luxury units sit vacant for most of the year, effectively removing supply from the market. For instance, in 2017, the City Comptroller's Office estimated roughly 75,000 apartments were vacant but not for rent. The current proposal, aiming for implementation by 2026, isn't just talk anymore. It's a looming reality for owners of these high-value, non-primary residences. This isn't just theoretical. Imagine a Central Park South penthouse, valued at $30 million. Under the initial proposals, that could mean an annual tax bill adding upwards of $300,000 to carrying costs. So, while it's intended to fund services, it also fundamentally changes the investment calculus for ultra-luxury real estate in the city. But the big question here is, what exactly are the thresholds for this tax? And how have those goalposts shifted from those initial discussions of $5 million mansions to today's focus on $30 million Megapenthouse houses? But the most fascinating twist in this whole saga? The goalposts for who this tax even applies to have shifted dramatically, making it less about multi-million-dollar mansions and more about multi-tens of millions megapenthouse. Originally, the legislative proposal, back in early 2023, targeted properties valued at $5 million or more, with a tiered rate structure designed to hit moderately expensive second homes. We were looking at a 0.5% annual tax for properties between $5 million and $10 million, escalating all the way up to a hefty 4% annually for properties over $25 million. Think about that. A $26 million penthouse owner paying over $1 million each year just in this tax. However, after intense lobbying from groups like the Real Estate Board of New York and months of political wrangling, the latest iteration, as reported by the city and Crane's New York business in late 2024, has drastically altered the threshold. Now, the tax is less likely to hit a $5 million pre-war apartment in the West Village and much more focused on properties with a market value of $30 million or more. The proposed new tiered rates are still significant. 0.5% for properties between $30 million and $50 million, increasing incrementally up to 2.5% for those stratospheric properties exceeding $100 million. This monumental shift, as Lawrence Yun of the National Association of Realtors pointed out in a recent interview with Bloomberg, reflects a political compromise designed to mollify the broader real estate market while still projecting an image of taxing the ultra-wealthy. It's a classic case of aiming for the billionaire instead of the mere millionaire to get something, anything, passed. But even with this higher threshold, who is really paying the piper here? The answer might surprise you. But here's the kicker. The biggest surprise isn't who the tax hits, but how it bypasses entrenched federal tax loopholes designed to shield the wealthy. Traditionally, the city has struggled to tax those high-value, sporadically used properties because many are held by LLCs or foreign entities. These structures often obscure true ownership and allow investors to declare minimal local income, thereby minimizing their tax footprint on local services they barely use. Think about it. A $50 million penthouse on Central Park South owned by a foreign LLC, empty 300 days a year, contributes almost nothing beyond property taxes and the initial transfer tax. The pied-à-terre tax, however, aims squarely at these ghost apartments by targeting non-NYC residents, LLCs owning residential properties, and particularly foreign buyers who have no clear primary residency in New York. The enforcement mechanism is key here, and it's likely to be tied directly to primary residency declarations for income tax purposes or even utility usage data. We're going to see a proof of primary residence requirement emerge, where owners will need to demonstrate substantial presence, akin to how some states determine domicile for tax purposes. For example, if your electricity bill shows minimal usage for 10 months out of the year, or you're declaring primary residence in London for federal tax purposes, you're likely in the crosshairs. This is a direct shot at the shadow economy of luxury real estate, a move that analysts like Nick Jurley have hinted at for years as cities look for novel revenue streams. The unseen fallout, however, is why everyone's watching closely, because these changes rarely stay localized to just one market. But what's truly fascinating is how this localized tax proposal is sparking a global conversation about wealth flight, even from a market as seemingly impervious as New York City. The unseen fallout here isn't just about a few less private jet landings at Teterboro. It's about a potential reevaluation of NYC's status as a global wealth haven. Analysts like Nick Jurley, who's been tracking these shifts, point to the psychological impact over the raw financial burden. For the ultra-wealthy, a few $100,000 in additional taxes on a $50 million penthouse might be manageable, but the perception of being actively targeted, a feeling of regulatory instability, can be a far more powerful motivator for relocation. We saw a glimpse of this during the pandemic when residents, not just pied-à-terre owners, accelerated their departures for lower tax states like Florida and Texas. The concern, as voiced by figures like John Gomez of Douglas Elliman, is that this kind of tax could disincentivize future investment in New York luxury real estate. If the city becomes perceived as less welcoming, we could see a slowdown in new ultra-high-end development, impacting construction jobs, related services, and the entire ecosystem built around servicing these properties. Consider the example of a Chinese investor who, in 2018, paid $70 million for a full-floor unit at Central Park Tower. While the financial hit of a pied-à-terre tax might not bankrupt them, the question becomes, why invest another $50 million in a new development if the regulatory environment keeps shifting? This isn't just about the current owners. It's about the next wave of capital. The debate around fairness also looms large. Is it equitable to disproportionately tax owners who, through their multi-million-dollar property tax bills, already contribute significantly to the city's coffers, even if they're not full-time residents? It's a complex calculation, especially when you consider the billion-dollar discrepancy in where this projected revenue won't actually go. But here's the ultimate bait-and-switch. The initial promise of $11 billion in revenue for affordable housing and public transit from this tax has now been all but evaporated. Let's rewind. Back in early 2023, when the original legislative proposal for the transfer tax targeted properties at $5 million and above, the city's independent budget office estimated it would generate a staggering $11 billion over 10 years. That was the headline. That was the vision. Massive, transformative funding for the city's housing crisis and its chronically underfunded public transit system. Think thousands of new affordable units, real upgrades to subway lines. Now, fast forward to the current $30 million threshold. The pool of affected properties has shrunk from what was initially projected to be several thousand transactions annually to, frankly, just a few hundred ultra-luxury deals a year. To give you some context, according to Ocean Realty's luxury market report, only 286 properties over $30 million sold in Manhattan between 2013 and 2023. That's an average of 28 transactions a year. You don't need a Bloomberg terminal to see the math there. Even if we see a slight uptick, the revenue generated at this drastically reduced scope is going to be a fraction, probably less than 10%, of that original $11 billion promise. What this means is that the grand vision of significantly funding broad public services like affordable housing and transit, that was the initial selling point, is now largely unachievable. This tax, once framed as a massive impact on affordability and public funding, has been scaled down so much that it's poised to become more of a symbolic gesture than a significant revenue generator. It's the ultimate irony. A tax with a colossal promise, now set to deliver a comparatively tiny trickle. The money, it turns out, largely won't go where it was initially promised. So, when we pull back and look at this New York City pied-à-terre tax, it's clear the conversation has shifted dramatically. What started as a potentially transformative policy, aimed at generating over $11 billion for critical infrastructure and affordable housing, has been whittled down significantly. The initial ambitious targets, those that truly stirred global discussions about wealth flight, now seem largely symbolic. Instead of a major revenue engine, we're left with a more modest measure, impacting a narrower segment of the market, and ultimately raising far less than originally touted. It makes you wonder, given this drastic scaling back, will this tax truly move the needle for New York's housing crisis or transit needs, or is it more of a political statement? I'm curious, what's your take on these types of highly localized taxes and their actual effectiveness? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more deep dives into how state and city-level policies impact your real estate investments, make sure to subscribe. And if you're trying to understand how federal tax policy, specifically the SALT cap, disproportionately impacts high-tax states like New York, you need to watch my detailed breakdown of the SALT cap repeal efforts right here.